Okay, we're gonna call the September 14th Yampa-White-Green Basin Roundtable to order. Introduction of members and audience, roll call members, please.
All right. I'm not usually do this, so forgive me if I mispronounce your name. Doug Munger.
Here.
Tom Gray.
Here.
Ginny Love. Here. Julie Baxter.
She said she wasn't gonna make it.
Steve Hinkmeyer.
Here.
Alden Vandenbrink. Ken Brenner.
Here.
Mike Camlin. Sean Welder.
Present.
Jay Sheehan. Tim Winkler.
Here.
Casey Green. Here. Mike Attell.
Here.
Callie Henderson. Here. Brian Hodge.
Here.
Will Myers. Here. Ken Ventries.
Here.
Frank Alfone. Rich Thompson.
Here.
Jeff Myers.
Here.
Jackie Brown. Jeff Comstock. Doug Davis.
Here.
Chuck Whiteman.
Here.
Chris Collins.
Here.
Jennifer Holloway.
Here.
Travis Day.
Here.
Bill Badaraka. Vince Wojcicki. To your right,
Here by Zoom.
Pat O'Toole. Jonathan Bowers.
Here. All right, approve, modify agenda. Are we good to go or do we need to amend?
Let me get the agenda up so you guys can see it.
I'll vote we approve the agenda. Motion's been made to approve the agenda. Need a second? Second. Second did, say your name. Brian Hodge. Brian Hodge. Longer made the motion. All in favor, say aye. 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 Opposed, same sign. Unanimous. Review and approve July 13th, 2022 minutes. Has everybody had a chance to look them over? Anything needs to be changed? If not, entertain a motion to approve. So motion made by Steve, seconded by Jeff. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Same sign.
Aye.
Same sign if you don't like. Unanimous. Budget report and CWCB staff update. Jeff Rodriguez, you get 10 minutes.
All right, I don't know that I'll take a full 10 minutes. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Please do.
Gonna need, yeah, there it is.
Preview or?
Can you guys see that okay?
Now we can.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, great. So not a ton to update folks on this cycle, but just want to provide a few updates, some reminders, and then take any questions y'all have. So an update on the regional grant manager positions. We've been calling them the regional coordinator positions, but so those applications closed and the hiring committee is working through reviewing those applications. We're hoping that we can get those filled sometime in November, but that's a moving target with HR and things like that. But I'm told the applicant pool, people are really excited about it, some really qualified applicants. But those folks will primarily focus on administering and managing water plan grants. So their primary duties will be administrative, accounting, things like that for water plan grants. They'll work closely with myself, others in the water supply planning section, and then basin roundtables. And they'll focus on assisting stakeholders throughout the life cycle of water plan grants, and really focus on administering those and keeping track of those. Other duties could include regional communication and outreach. That'll kind of just depend on basin need and what that looks like. Each one of those positions will likely look a little bit different in the basins, but the planned basin representation is the South Platte, the Metro, and North Platte, the Arkansas Basin, the Rio Grande and Southwest, and then the Colorado, Gunnison, and Yampa-White-Green. That's you guys. And then, as you all have probably heard by now, the board approved a $17 million infusion into the WSRF fund in July. And we've been working on revising the criteria and guidelines to address the new infusion of funds from an unexpected but delightful windfall in severance tax revenues. So those revised criteria and guidelines are going to be submitted to the board next week at the September board meeting. Yeah, we anticipate those funds from this infusion. They could potentially be available as early as the December 1 CWCB WSRF deadline. So if you know folks are looking for WSRF funds for that deadline, we'll likely have the statewide match fund available at that deadline too. That's a moving target, but I think that's the proposal as of right now. As you all are intimately aware of, there has been some recorder changing and turnover, not just in this basin, but in a lot of them. So we thought this was a really good opportunity to meet with the chairs and the recorders and just kind of review the roundtable protocols, as well as we are going to increase the recorder funds from that $5,000 annual amount to $6,500 annually, effective immediately. So when you get a new recorder in place, they'll have access to all of that amount. We think that'll help kind of address the time commitment that's required for the recorder position, as well as kind of provide a little bit of an increase in wage for them. And just I'll be sending out an email in the coming weeks to the chair to get some meetings on the books for that. Probably it's going to end up being individually, so with each basin individually, and I'll work with Alden to make sure that I don't schedule that meeting before y'all get a recorder in place. We also, in an effort to just continue offering hybrid meetings, we're going to provide some audio visual support for the roundtables. We purchased Meeting Owls. I know you guys have one, but I think Alden said you borrow it or rent it. So we purchased meeting owls for each basin. The basin will need to designate somebody who goes to the meeting in person every meeting to take possession of that owl. And I will reach out to get something set up to where we can go over setup and running it. Although you guys seem like you have it handled. If there's immediate need for that equipment, please reach out to me and we can get something going pretty quickly. We just have a little bit of an agreement we need people to sign before we can distribute those. Was gonna wait for the recorder chair meeting, but if there's immediate need, yeah, just reach out and I can get that going. As far as the project database and grant and loans portal, the roundtable chair, as well as one more person, can have deeper access to the project database, which would allow them to signify if the project came through the roundtable, as well as potentially pull down some project proponent contact information, which isn't available on the public facing side of the project database. So the chair will need to designate whoever that is. Some folks are using their means committee chair or their recorder, or whoever that may be, PEPO person. We'll just let the basin decide there. And then if folks are still having trouble with the grants and loans portal, there are how-to videos posted on our website that are pretty much a step-by-step video on how to submit water plan grants, WSRF grants, and I think PEPO grants as well. So there may only be 2 videos up there right now, but I think we're gonna have 3 eventually. And then just a few reminders for you all. The water plan public comment period closes September 30th. So in just a couple weeks. So if you're compiling comments at your organization or at the roundtable level, we'd love to hear those by September 30th. You can submit those comments on engagecwcb.org. So submit your comments, share your water success story, and commit to action there on Engage CWCB. We have one more virtual water plan listening session on September 28th from 4 to 6 p.m. That one's going to be dedicated to the robust agriculture action area, but comments and questions on any portion of the plan will be welcomed there. You can get more information as well as the agenda and meeting link right there on engagecwcb.org. Couple funding updates for you all in addition to the WSRF infusion. The House Bill 1379, or Wildfire Prevention Watershed Restoration Funding. Wow, that's a mouthful. Those grants will be available sometime this fall, and we're still working on criteria and guidelines for those different buckets of funding. So that funding totals about $15 million, with $10 million allocated to watershed restoration grants, $5 million allocated to federal technical assistance, and that $5 million is split right down the middle, with $2.5 million for local capacity grants. So individuals and organizations can apply for that $2.5 million or a portion of it to get or to hire technical assistance on their own. Another $2.5 million is going directly to CWCB to hire a contractor to provide technical assistance for addressing the need to and the attempt to get more federal funding in the door. So those RFPs for the contractor for that $2.5 million for CWCB technical assistance went out at the end of August, and we anticipate selecting a contractor for that by the end of October. All the dates are in the RFP. It's kind of a moving target right now still, but for any questions on House Bill 1379 funding, you can contact Anna Moss, just anna.moss@state.co.us, and I can drop her email in the chat after this. And then Senate Bill 215, that is Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act Cash Fund. The governor's office has put together a website called Colorado Forward. And that website has all the guidelines and criteria, the application portal ready to go. And the governor's office will review applications for those funds from state agencies, local agencies, or federally recognized tribes. For any questions on that bucket of funding, you can reach out to Nate Pearson. Again, nate.pearson@state.co.us. And then just one more thing, we are hosting the Colorado Landscape Summit on November 9th. It's going to be at the Denver Botanic Gardens Chatfield Farms location. And I will send this invitation to Alden to distribute to the roundtable. If you want, you can scan that little QR code right now while you're in the room, and that'll take you to the invitation website and give you a little bit more information on that. And then Alden always asks for me to report on the WSRF budget. So right now, I'm seeing that you all still have $2,250 of the stimulus fund, which has a spend by date. I believe the May board meeting, all of those stimulus funds need to be allocated by the May board meeting. I think the spend by date is actually July, but the May board meeting will be the last time the board will hear any funding requests for that. In your basin account, you have, I'm showing $695,740. And then you have an approved grant that the roundtable approved that's going to the board in September here to the tune of $139,500. So if the board approves that, I'm assuming that'll eat up the rest of your stimulus funds and then eat into that WSRF account balance there. That's all I have for you today. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Okay, any questions for Jeff?
Yeah, I have a question. So this is Doug Munger, Jeff. So I guess go back to that slide that you had on the basin representation, and how did you guys decide that that was going to be when we have basically 50% of all of the western slope, the Colorado, the Gunnison, the Yampa-White-Green represented by one, and then you have the Arkansas being represented by one. And we have 80% of the water too. So I'm curious how we allocated one representative to the western slope. Yeah.
Yeah.
Planned basin representation, Colorado, Gunnison, Yampa-White-Green. And then we have the other three. So I guess, I guess we could probably use them too. So.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I am not exactly sure how they decided that. I wasn't in on those conversations. That's way above my pay grade. But from the looks of it, I think the idea is that they would be regionally focused, and so I think that's what they started with, was regional, and we only have funding for 4 positions, so we had to break it out some way. And yeah, I think it's mostly due to size. I'm assuming they factored in need too, but I do not know the answer to that. I can get back with you on that.
No, that's fine. I'm just commenting as much.
No,
as
it's okay.
anything.
You can get back.
It's a good point. It's a good point. It's a good point.
We'll damn sure have some good windshield time for that person or whatever. So.
Yeah, exactly. That western slope person is going to be doing a lot of driving. That's for sure.
Hey, Jeff.
This is T. Wright. I had a similar question as Doug, so I second Doug's concern.
Hey Jeff, this is Steve Hinkmeyer, the grants chairman. So you said there's $139,500 grant that's going before the board this month, which is the Stillwater Reservoir upgrades. Was there not another one for $62,440 for the Thresher Dam rehabilitation phase 2? That was going to be on that agenda?
I don't know. I can double check that here during the meeting and get back to you on that. I didn't see that, but I can look real quick right now.
Okay, we approved them both at the same time in May, and I thought they would both hit on the September agenda. So if there's a problem with that second one, I'd like to know it. They'd like to know it.
Yeah, I will. I can look that up right now.
Okay, thank you.
So I had one other question on and the severance tax bump at 17 million for the WSRF. Now that's going to be great. I guess I'm still perplexed at the CWCB level, what happened to the gambling proceeds. And so I don't think you need to answer it right now, but I'm still interested to know what happened with those, and maybe there weren't as much as it was supposed to be, but then I heard earlier that there was a lot more than what was thought to be had too, so.
Yeah, so the Proposition DD funding, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, sir, yeah.
Yeah, so that's allocated to water plan grants.
And is it managed by the CWCB?
Yeah, the water plan grants, they're managed by the CWCB. So that water plan grants are separate from WSRF. There's 5 different categories of water plan grants. That program gets a $26 million allocation each year from Proposition DD funding, as well as some other funding streams that come into that as well. So that's where that money's going, not into WSRF.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more what that water planning, is that for communities to do water plans?
No. So it's nope, it's the same kind of grant application process. It's just a different grant funding program. So we call it water plan grants because it's tied to the Colorado water plan. But it's for communities and organizations and things like that. Just another stream of funding in addition to WSRF. Those water plan grants don't necessarily have to go through the roundtable. We highly encourage project proponents or potential project proponents to get in touch with the roundtable and get letters of support for those applications as well. It's just a different funding stream.
So it still builds infrastructure though, as well as plans and paper?
Yeah, so the water plan grants program actually doesn't allow for aging infrastructure. It can, I think there is some ability for like new infrastructure or new storage or things like that. So the 5 categories of water plan grants are water storage and supply. So some infrastructure, just not aging infrastructure. That's the main difference between water plan grants and the WSRF grant program, is that WSRF can be used for aging infrastructure. So 5 categories are water storage and supply, water sharing agreements, conservation and land use planning, engagement and innovation, and then agricultural projects, and then watershed health and recreation projects.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Hey Jeff, this is Ken Brenner. I had a couple of questions. First on the regional coordinator. Aside from the emphasis on the water plan grant administration and support, I had conversations and was hoping to hear more about how this person might help integrate between the various roundtables and improve the, our ability to be effective and learn from each other and just, kind of cross-pollinate between the various roundtables within each of the quadrants. And I want to echo the earlier comments about maybe this is not, I'm not sure that this was proportionately divided up amongst the state, but I'd like to hear your comment on that. And then I had one other question for you after your response.
Yeah. So that's a good question, Ken. So those regional program coordinators, they're going to be really focused on water plan grants, like I said. So back when the water plan in 2016, when the water plan grant program started, we got this massive influx of funding for this grant program, but no additional staff to help administer it. And so essentially, Anna's been working for a long time, lobbying to get some staff on her team to help administer these grants. So grant administration takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And so right now, we have just divvied up water plan grants to essentially the different experts in those 5 categories I told you about. And so when those folks, like in their job description, grant administration and project management is kind of a really small piece of it, but because of the overwhelming need for water plan grant administration, those folks like Nora Flynn, our agriculture specialist, takes up a lot of her time. And so the idea for these positions is to move that administration to these positions and to have them have a regional focus. And so I think, to your point, Ken, each basin is going to be a little bit different. Each one of those 4 positions will probably take on a little bit different role in each basin, and some other duties outside of those administration duties could be some of that education and promoting funding opportunities and those types of things. But they will spend a lot of time working with project proponents at the very beginning of the project. That could be identifying scopes of work, creating budgets, those types of things. And so I think it remains to be seen how much of that they'll be able to do with their time. But I think, like I said, they'll work really closely with the roundtable, and that could certainly be some of their duties. And they'll work really closely with myself too. So did that answer your question?
Close enough. The fact that they're integrating with the roundtables is encouraging to hear.
Yeah. I think I'll just add to that a little bit. I think at the beginning, it'll take some time to get them onboarded, and the bulk of their duties will be administering grants. Think of them as like another Ben Wade on our team or something like that, where their sole focus is the water plan grants program, where Ben's is WSRF, right, where he helps folks submit applications, helps people figure out, is this a WSRF project? Is it a water plan grant project? So they'll probably do some of that as well. And then as they, figure out how much time that takes and what their role is, then I think there would be some wiggle room in there for them to work with the roundtable and address roundtable needs in that way, and work with you, Ken, on PEPO stuff and really getting the word out about this program.
Thanks. That's good to hear. The other thing is, earlier in the afternoon, we had a discussion about the importance of data collection and support for trying to get increased monitoring of, like the Airborne Snow Observatory, so that we have a better idea just how much water is in our reservoir. I know you have important budget discussions going on next year. We also have the problem of too much money. So maybe you could help express that we have a genuine interest up here in Northwest Colorado about learning more about exactly how much moisture we have in our snowpack, especially in regards to how we respond to the administration from the Bureau of Reclamation on the Colorado River?
Yeah, those are good questions. I can certainly relay that to the team. I think, there is with this infusion to the WSRF program, we're proposing bringing back the statewide match program to the tune of around, I think, $11 million into that statewide account too. And so those two buckets we're proposing are for drought resilience and aging infrastructure. So providing another stream of funding for folks with a lot more money in it. And so I think, to your point, Ken, those types of projects would certainly fit into the drought resilience category, and could potentially fund some
Well, you're in a better position to negotiate with the Bureau of Reclamation, but they just told us that they have over $12 billion that they just received to try to help address some of these needs in response to the drought. So perhaps you could also encourage the Bureau of Reclamation to match any funds from the state. That should really increase the ability to cover the entire state. So we really know a lot more about how much water is in our reservoir.
Yeah, that's great. I also think some of that federal technical assistance money could, you could submit some applications for that, for those funds to help potentially get some Bureau of Reclamation money if it's, administered through a grant program or something like that too.
Jeff, we have another person with a question. Robert?
Thanks very much. This is Robert Sakata, Brighton, Colorado. I appreciate being able to join, and I thought I'd help Jeff out with our CWCB meeting next week. On the consent agenda, we do have the application for, is it the Drescher Dam rehabilitation?
Yeah, it's on there.
What you're asking about. So that's part of the consent agenda. The staff has recommended that for approval. And then Ken, to get to your question, CWCB, we had a finance committee meeting today, and the board did express a lot of interest in how we do support the snow observatory, aerial snow observation efforts. And Amy Osdek did mention that through the Colorado River efforts, they're really looking at ways to better support that. So I think we're all looking in the same direction and seeing the value of being able to measure the quantities of snow water equivalent that we have. So thanks.
Thank you, Robert, and congratulations on your position with the Water Conservation Board.
Thank you.
Thanks for letting us know. Any other questions? Okay, I want to just say, I want to thank you for increasing the monies to 6,500. We need to hire somebody.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving right along, public hearing, public input and comments. Anybody from the public like to speak? Yes.
Yes, hi, my name is Holly Kirkpatrick. I'm the Public Information and External Affairs Manager for the Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District. And I just wanted to invite you all to the first annual Yampa Youth Water Festival next Wednesday, September 21st. It will be held at the Route County Fairgrounds and Dry Creek Park in Hayden. It is targeted to 5th grade students, and we have every 5th grade class in Route and Moffett County registered to attend. So we'll have 415 students there, and we are seeking volunteers. If you'd like to volunteer for that event, I'll post a link to our website in the chat. And I would encourage you, even if you can't come out and volunteer for the whole day, I would encourage you just to come by and see what it's all about. I think this is going to be a really great event. And I believe that Ken might also be seeking some volunteers
I can use help.
to help him with the Yampa-White-Green Basin Roundtable learning station that we'll have at the Water Festival.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Drew, you have your hand raised?
Yes, I've got a quick public comment if now's the appropriate time.
Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Drew Peternell. I work for Trout Unlimited. I wanted to just take a real quick minute to let you all know about a new grant opportunity that's available through the Colorado Ag Water Alliance. This is a new program, and in addition to CAWA, the program is being supported by a bunch of other organizations, including the River District, the Farm Bureau, Cattlemen's Association, Trout Unlimited, several other conservation groups. Just a large number of groups are supporting this effort. We hope that funding is going to be coming to this program from the CIBCB. There's an application pending now. And the idea is that under this grant opportunity, funds would be made available for early stage projects that help agricultural producers to become more drought resilient or to advance water conservation strategies, innovative water conservation strategies. And again, the hope here is that the project would act as an incubator for projects that might not be ready for other funding sources. So new projects that are just coming into concept now, we're hoping to get those projects off the ground, get them moving, especially those projects that might not, again, be available for other funding sources. The focus is on drought resilience and water conservation. Examples might include alternative cropping, rotational fallowing, stream and wetland restoration, soil health improvements, any other innovative concepts to help us deal with the difficult water conditions that we're facing. Applications for these grants are going to be due at the beginning of December 1st. Projects will be implemented during 2023. And I just thought that some of you might be interested in this opportunity. And if you are interested in the opportunity, please reach out to me. My email address is drew, drew.peternell, Peternell, @tu.org. I'd be happy to help you answer questions or to put you in touch with people who can. Again, CAWA is sort of in the lead, but there are a number of groups supporting it, including TU. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you for the information. Anything else in public comment? Okay, moving on. Consideration action on roundtable projects, White River algae report.
So I think Natalie Day or Corey Williams are both on Zoom, and we'll do a presentation on our algae project. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you, Callie. You can start anytime.
As Natalie's getting set up, I'll just thank the roundtable for their time to present these results and just highlight that an extended version of this talk is available on the White River and Douglas Creek Conservation District page, a recording of the full hour-long presentation. This will be a little bit briefer version, but it covers 2 scientific investigation reports, a data release, and a fact sheet. So we'll keep it concise for this group, but there's more available online if you have questions.
Okay, can you guys see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay. All right, hi, I'm Natalie Day. And as Corey said, I am going to present the results of a study that we have been working on since 2018 in the White River Basin. A longer version of this talk is available on the TAG website. So if you feel like you need to hear it again or want to hear a little bit more detail, you can go there and find a longer version. So this study began in 2017. We started working with the TAG, the Technical Advisory Group, led by Callie, to design a study. And the bulk of the data collection occurred in 2018 through 2020. We collected a lot of data, and in 2021, we received additional funding from the River District to continue collecting algae and algal taxonomy. And in 2022, this summer, we received more funding from the White River and Douglas Creek Conservation District to, again, continue collecting algae. So we're building a relatively long-term record of algal occurrence in the basin. Okay, so I'm going to take a minute to describe this hydrograph on the right. This is the annual hydrograph or stream flow record at White River above Coal Creek near Meeker. It's has a period of record for about 60 years. And this black line represents the daily mean discharge. And this is displayed in water year. So you can see through the winter, discharge stream flow is pretty consistent. As you enter the spring period, flows rise, and in June or July, stream flows start to drop off. And we can compare this to the percentile classes. So we can compare it to what's normal based on the period of record. So if the black line went up into the blue region, it would be a much above normal water year. And if it goes into the red region, it would be a below normal water year. So I think this was 2019 or 2020 that we're looking at here. So you can see we had some below normal conditions during that year. So the way I just described it is a way that a hydrologist might describe the hydrograph, but today I'm focusing on algae. And so I'm going to talk through this again in the eyes of a biologist, or even better, from an algae growing in the river. So during the winter, temperatures are really cold, and it's not a great time for algae to grow. During the spring season, the water rises, the water becomes turbid, the water is really cold, not a lot of light is reaching the bottom of the river, and there's just a lot of force flushing through the river. So it's not a great time for algae to start growing. But as the spring runoff recedes, water temperatures warm, the water clears up. There's less water in the river, so there could be less dilution of nutrients. So that's an ideal time for algae to start growing, and into the summer as stream flow conditions become lower. So I'm describing this because the design of our study was really focused on how stream flow influences algae. It not only influences the physical conditions, like the physical disturbance of the bed, but also water quality conditions like light availability, dissolved oxygen, nutrients, and water temperature. So differences in the stream flow year to year in the timing, duration, and magnitude of high and low stream flow events can influence conditions that affect algae. And so on some of these slides, I don't really have time to talk about all the details today, but essentially we designed the study. We had some hypotheses and some ideas that to test certain factors, like how do high flows and light availability, temperature, and nutrients impact algal growth year to year and also between sites. And so based on our ideas about these controlling factors, we had two main hypotheses. The first was that during years with large spring runoff events, large enough to move the bed sediment, there would be less algae. And then we also hypothesized that higher water temperatures, light availability, and nutrient availability would promote the growth of algal biomass. So really, we were trying to identify why is algae occurring more now than it used to, and also why does it occur in greater concentrations at certain sites. And so we collected a lot of new data to better understand the spatial differences in algae across the watershed. So this is the Upper White River watershed with Meeker down here. And our study sites, there was 20 study sites that started up at Trappers Lake and went all the way down to just above Meeker. We also worked on the South Fork. And so all of these 20 sites are where we collected algae and nutrients every year, and light and temperature. And then the red dots indicate long-term water quality sites. So in addition to collecting new data, we also used existing data. So these are places where the USGS regularly monitors nutrients. And so we also looked at these sites to see if conditions had changed over time that has made conditions more favorable to algae. Okay, so I'm going to jump into results now. So I'll take a little bit of time to explain these graphs because they're set up this way throughout the entire presentation. Oh, wait, let me go back. So also on this slide, I want to point out that I broke up the watershed into different little sub-basins that, you know, are purely invented for this report. So the upper North Fork describes the 4 upmost sites on the upper North Fork. So really up in the trees, alpine area. Well, where there would be trees if it wouldn't have burned. And then the lower North Fork represents the sites below that down to the confluence. There's a South Fork subbasin, the upper main stem, and the lower main stem. So it's just a way for us to break up the watershed and talk about general areas. And so in this graph on the top right, this is showing chlorophyll. So you'll hear me use this interchangeably. Chlorophyll, algal biomass, algal concentration, I'm referring to the same thing. And so here we have all of these graphs are displayed from upstream to downstream. So that upper North Fork Trappers Lake group, lower North Fork, the South Fork tributaries, and then the main stem. And here it's showing algal biomass in 18, 19, 20, and 21. And so you can see right off the bat, the 2018 was definitely when we had the highest concentrations. This dotted line is the CDPHE line where concentrations above that indicate that a bloom occurred. So that's showing the year-to-year variance in algal biomass. Down below, we see the site-to-site variance. So again, we're going from upstream to downstream. And the different colored dots represent the different years. And so here we can see that 6 sites always had low algal biomass. The 6 most upstream sites and the most upstream site on the South Fork White River. The other sites were pretty variable. And again, you can see that 2018, the green dots, that's definitely when concentrations were the highest. One of the main, for hypothesis 1, one of the main analyses we did was trying to figure out why algal blooms occur some years and not other years. And so we collected a lot of data to enable us to calculate if the stream bed moved during spring runoff each year. Sometimes it's referred to as maintenance flows or bed moving stream flows. And so I'm not going to go into the details of how we did that, but you know, as everybody in this area knows, the water years were really different during the period of study. So in 2018, you can see that the spring runoff occurred early and it was pretty low. And that year we measured little to no movement of the stream bed. In 2019, it was an awesome big water year that ran late into the summer. And we observed movement at multiple sites. And in 2020, again, it was a pretty bad water year and there was limited movement at any of the sites. And we did not do it for 2021, but I'm just showing this, I guess, because it's depressing. So we can guess what happened in 2021. There was probably no bed movement during that year. And so going back to hypothesis 1, we hypothesized that during years with large bed moving flows, there would be less algae. So remember that in 2018, there was no bed movement and we saw large algal blooms across the basin. In 2019, there were bed moving flows, really large stream flows, and we see very little algae. And we think that whatever effect this had on the watershed, moving all those rocks, had a multi-year effect and may explain why we didn't see algae in 2020. In 2021, we only measured algae at a couple of sites because it was limited funding. It was like bonus money to collect algae. And so we did see algae out there, but it definitely wasn't as large as 2018. And so this tells us that, this indicates that those bed moving flows in 2019 may have had an important effect on algal biomass occurrence across years. And it may not be as simple as big water year, no algae, and then it's like next year is a whole new world. There could be a multi-year effect. And so now I'm going to focus more on, okay, so if differences in stream flow is one of the major factors contributing to algal biomass across years, what controls the amount of biomass across sites? So there's certain areas that have more or less biomass. And so there's a lot going on in this graph. And I just want to focus on the basics here. So we used a linear mixed effects model to evaluate the relative role of many different factors. And so Trout Unlimited on this collected water temperature during 2 years, that's the red and blue colors, 2019 and 2020. They collected water temperature at all 20 sites. And this is mean August water temperature. And what we see here is that water temperature, for the most part, increases as you go downstream. This dotted line is a line that represents a temperature threshold for benthic algae. So above that line is when conditions are ideal for benthic algae growth. So you can see that in both 2019 and 2020, right when you get around this site on the lower North Fork, conditions are favorable for algae. And again, remember, this is high up the South Fork. So once you get about halfway down that tributary, conditions are favorable for algal growth in August. And what we found in the linear mixed effects model is that mean August water temperature had a positive effect on algae, or higher temperatures meant greater algal biomass. We also hypothesized that more light availability or would mean more algal growth. And so we measured canopy cover at all 20 sites. Overall, we found that canopy cover was very low in the watershed. The highest canopy cover was about 25%, and most were below 10%. And so that meant that there was plenty of light availability at all the sites, and we didn't find that there was an effect of canopy cover on algal biomass. We also measured particle size, or the size of rocks at every site. And here we'll focus on the light blue line. That's the median rock size, or the typical rock size at each site. And there was no real pattern to this, but in our linear mixed effects model, we did find that larger rocks had a positive effect on algal biomass. And if that's confusing, essentially we're interpreting it as meaning bigger rocks are more stable, and so they can have more algae that grow on them because they're less likely to move, which also supports what we found with the differences in algae year to year. During years with big flows, we saw less algae. So this supports that finding as well. And here again, we already saw this graph. This is algal biomass at all the sites. And I just want to point out that here is when these 5 upper sites that never had much algae, you can see it starts to increase right around here. And if we look up at the temperature, that's when the temperatures reach that threshold that promote algal growth. And so
what is that temperature?
I'm sorry, what?
Can you tell us what that temperature is? That
It's 13 degrees Celsius. Yeah, so you can see that the algal biomass really starts to, as soon as you reach that threshold, it's basically free of limitations. So we think that temperature is a really important factor affecting algal accumulation in this watershed. We also looked at nutrients, and nutrients are complicated. And so I'm just going to focus on the basics here. We looked at nitrogen, phosphorus, different kinds of nitrogen and phosphorus, and also nitrogen to phosphorus ratios, which is an indication of nutrient availability or limitation. And we found that greater phosphorus availability also had a positive effect on algae. And so these sites lower down in the basin tended to have higher phosphorus. Here, the orange points represent summer concentrations of phosphorus. And again, this dotted line is a threshold above which that is thought to promote algal biomass. So concentrations were definitely higher, lower in the basin. And when you look at N to P ratios, that means that there was greater phosphorus availability. So this may also help explain differences in algae across sites. So going back to the second hypothesis, sites with greater stability or larger rock sizes, higher water temperatures, and greater phosphorus availability had greater algal biomass. So, this was all data that we collected during those anywhere from 2 to 4 years. And so we learned a lot from this information, and we can take what we learned from this and look back at historic data and see if there have been changes happening in the basin that have led to conditions being more favorable. Because according to people in the White River Basin, these algal blooms haven't been happening forever. They weren't as widespread and they weren't as frequent as they occur now. So is there something that's changed to make this start happening with more frequency and severity? And this is very similar to the report that I wrote for the upper Yampa River Basin. I looked at changes in stream flow over the past 40 years. So this is just showing daily stream flow at White River above Coal Creek over the past 40 years. There's a pretty clear, you can see very clearly that during the past 20 years, there's been a lot lower lows than there were in the previous 20 years. But we did some analyses to look at how stream flow conditions have changed. So here we have 1-day maximum flows, mean flows, and 7-day minimum flows. And I looked at how these stream flows have changed monthly. And then this last little bar in the graph shows annual changes. And what we found is that there were decreases in stream flow during summer months. So mean and 7-day minimum flows decreased during August and September. And there was an annual decrease in 7-day minimum flows as well. It ended up being about a 66% decrease annually over the past 40 years. We also noticed that there were decreases in stream flow in May and June. They weren't significant, but they're, my dog's dreaming very loudly. Stop, Millie. And they weren't significant, but that could indicate a shift toward earlier snowmelt runoff and a decrease in peak flow. And this is something that's happening across the West and definitely the Colorado River Basin. So it would not be surprising if we were seeing that here. And so going back to that hydrograph, what we see based on looking at this data is that our stream flows are getting lower. And that means that temperatures are getting high, or water temperatures are likely getting higher. There's less dilution of nutrients. There's probably more light reaching the bottom of the stream bed because there's less water in the river. And then also, if indeed we are seeing earlier peak flows that don't last as long and aren't as high, so imagine this whole hump pushed backwards, that essentially means that there's a longer growing season for algae to grow. It means that the drop off occurs earlier and you have this long season of low hot time period for algae to start growing. And so changes in stream flow, the changes in stream flow that we observed indicate that conditions have become more favorable for algae growth in the White River. We also looked at long-term changes in nutrients. So again, there's a lot on the slide, but here I just want to focus on these bottom graphs. We looked at changes in phosphorus and nitrogen, and found that phosphorus concentrations and loads are increasing and nitrogen concentrations are slightly decreasing. This is the N to P ratio at 3 sites where this has been monitored for 20 years. And you can see that these concentrations, these are measured concentrations that occur quarterly in the basin. And again, the orange dots represent summer concentrations, and that's what really matters to algae because that's what they're exposed to. You can see that the dots have shifted to more nitrogen limited conditions or more phosphorus availability, especially on the North Fork White River, and slightly less on the South Fork, and the main stem, not as much. We can't see that as much. But what we found in the linear mixed effects model is that phosphorus availability promoted algal biomass. And so we're seeing that conditions have changed across the basin that have become more favorable to benthic algae. Okay, so some take homes. Reduced spring and summer stream flows were identified as major contributors to algal blooms across years. Several other factors like water temperature, nutrients, and stream bed stability also contributed to elevated benthic algal biomass. Stream flow and nutrient conditions have become more favorable to benthic algae over varying timescales. And then, are these blooms happening everywhere in the basin, or do some sites have conditions that promote more algal biomass? They're occurring across the basin. They occur on the North Fork and the South Fork White River, and algae tends to begin at locations where temperatures are warm enough to promote algal growth. And okay, so given what we learned from this study, what can we do? We know that the factors contributing to algal blooms are complex and definitely interrelated. Increased knowledge about them can be used by local management groups to implement best management practices to limit nuisance levels of algal biomass. And continued monitoring of algae may provide additional insight for management strategies and tracking of BMP success. And we're super grateful over the past 2 years that we've received continued funding to keep measuring algae in the basin. And this is just one of many, I'll just say, this is just one of many projects that the USGS is working on related to benthic algae and algal blooms in the upper Colorado River Basin. There's a lot of new technology that we're working with, including remote sensing and satellites to be able to monitor and even predict algal blooms that may be usable in this basin in the future. So that's all I had, and I can answer questions now. And I totally acknowledge that that was a lot of information quick, but you know, there will be 2 SIRs and a fact sheet associated with this. And the fact sheet is meant to be more understandable to like a general audience, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Any questions? Steve has a question.
Yeah, when you were looking at the main stem, there's a growing number of fish ponds or ponds that are not in the river.
Yep.
Was there any consideration taken to increase temperature for flows through and across those ponds and temperature rises on those, or were they insignificant in the volume of water flow?
So Trout Unlimited actually did all the temperature monitoring, and they wrote a report about it. And I'm pretty sure in the report they did not note that there were any temperature changes directly below these ponds that you're referring to. And our sites were not set up to like specifically capture above and below the ponds. But I'm pretty sure in the report that they wrote, they did not find that there were noticeable increases in temperature below the ponds. But I'm sure Brian could speak more to that.
Yeah, that's true. There's a general pattern of upstream, downstream warming.
there were a few reaches that were outside that pattern that maybe we thought maybe more groundwater recharge from other things, but I can send you those a few.
I think it's on the website as well.
Yeah, it's on the website.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've got, everything is on the conservation District's website in regards to this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Natalie, thanks for that. This is Jeff Myers. Could you give us an example maybe of what one best management practice might be for managing algae?
Given what we learned, I'm not really supposed to give suggestions on best management practices, but something that reduces water temperature would be, there's plenty of things that could reduce water temperature. The river's pretty wide on the White River, so riparian shading, you're never going to shade the middle of the river. But a lot of the algal growth occurs on the banks. So increasing a common BMP is like planting riparian areas that can limit the amount of nutrients entering the river. It can shade the riparian area. So I think there's a lot of benefits with those type of BMPs that could address many of the factors we identified as important.
Yes, thanks.
I'd add to that, and again, not making a specific recommendation, but looking at flow, we saw very large changes in flow, and they have this interrelated effect on temperature and nutrients, as Natalie pointed out. And so looking at flow and maintaining flows within the river at different times, or disturbance flows, are things that have been done in other places that could disrupt algae. So there's a number of different things. The highlight of the study is sort of linking what parameters, and then there's a lot of different groups, including TU, NRCS, CSU Extension, Ag Extension, and other groups that have BMPs that would help you reduce like sediment loading and nutrients, or promote lower or cooler water temperatures, those sorts of things.
I have a question about the burn scar.
Yes.
Is there any evidence that would point towards the burn scar contributing to any of this problem, or maybe the start of it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's definitely one we thought about a lot. Generally, the immediate effects from like the effects from a fire on nutrient loading and sediment loading generally occur right away or within a couple years. And so I don't think that there was any, that's probably not what caused the algal blooms to start occurring. But, in a typical watershed, you would have shading that high up. And so water temperatures would start out colder. So it's interesting to think of how it's reversed, how it's actually extremely exposed at the top of the watershed. And then there is small portions of shade, but not having that shade up high could definitely contribute to elevated water temperatures, just right off the bat.
Even the forest itself would slow down spring melt.
Yeah, I mean, it can also have effects on snow melt. I know that the Trappers Lake Snowtell Station is considered unreliable for measuring SWE now because of the fire. And yeah, so yeah, when you don't have a canopy, you can have a lot faster snow melt, which can lead to less water infiltrating into the groundwater and a more rushed pulse of snow melt happening. So yeah, that could definitely play a role, but it's probably not the ultimate cause of continued algal blooms on the river.
Thank you. Another question.
Question and comment. I would go out on a limb and wonder if maybe not having so many trees up there might actually increase the flow rate as opposed to decrease. All those trees up there, if there was a lot of trees in the burn area, the flow rate might be a lot less than it is, and the algae could be worse than it is too. Just a thought. The question is, anybody considering that reservoir basins upstream might kind of help lower the temperatures. I don't know what the temperature of the reservoirs are, but is that a thought to you? Anybody's exploring right now? Yeah.
I'm having problems hearing, but it's something about how decreasing releases from the reservoir.
No, reservoir releases in general, if those would boost the flows and temperatures, is that being explored as a possible best management practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting when you look at this temperature slide, the temperatures are actually pretty high right when they come out of Trappers Lake. But, you know, that's just because the water has been heating up and I believe it's released from the top of the reservoir. So that makes sense. It is, I mean, I haven't heard any talk of releasing more from reservoirs, but we've discussed it in a couple of tag meetings, like in the summer, when algae's really high and it's, you know, affecting recreation and maybe causing drops in DO. Could there be some sort of reservoir release from Lake Avery or from Trappers or from water users all giving up 1 CFS on a day to kind of create a flood event to blast all the algae away? Those are ideas that we've tossed around at previous meetings, but you know, they're just thoughts at this point.
Ally?
So, I mean, that is, I think, one example downstream of our study was. So down, Alden did a big flush out of the Kinney Reservoir, and they flushed that out. And so I think that is one possibility. One of our challenges is we don't have much reservoir up country above where this starts. Avery is the only thing, and it's pretty limited, and the algae actually starts above it. One of the other things I wanted to just kind of note on the phosphorus increase. Now we talked about how much the phosphorus has increased over the last 20 years. Correct me if I'm wrong, Natalie, but it's the same in both the the North Fork and the South Fork, which is, I mean, we've really discussed that a lot because the fire is only in the North Fork, not in the South Fork. There are those that think that there's certain things going on in the North Fork that's causing it, you know, along the sides of the river. It's the same in both rivers, and you've got stuff happening in one and not the other. So that seems to be a pretty brief and describe what you mean by regional, but we keep talking about really a regional phenomenon that phosphorus is increasing significantly. But I'll let Natalie talk about.
Yeah, Callie, thanks for thanks for remembering that. Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I did write a report where I looked at long-term trend changes in stream flow and nutrients in the upper Yampa River watershed, and we found very similar increases in phosphorus in that watershed and on the North Fork and the South Fork of the White. So Callie's right. It's likely not just coming from one area, but it's more regional. And this is something that, you know, we are finding across the Western US associated with increased atmospheric deposition. So there's a lot more wind events and aridity happening. So there's a lot more dust and soil blowing around. Most of that dust is fine topsoil that contains a lot of nutrients like phosphorus. Wildfire aerosols contain phosphorus. We're also seeing a pretty dramatic warming trend, air temperature warming trend in specifically the region of the Yampa and the White. And that can have unknown consequences on the release of nutrients from soil in forests or in agricultural lands. So those are just some ideas that we've come up with to help explain what regional increases in phosphorus could be caused by.
Yeah, two things. One is that we're trying to record these meetings and the owl's up here. So if you're speaking from farther back in the room, make sure you use your big voice. And then I know we were measuring water this summer coming into Stagecoach. I think it was right around 70 degrees. And we were releasing water off the bottom of the reservoir at about 55. and it would still be back to 70, 20 miles downstream in Steamboat Springs. Now, it does go through Catamount, which is probably a significant warmer, but this temperature thing is a big problem. And 13 degrees, that's around 60 degrees, is that right?
No, 55.
55?
Yeah.
Yeah, and see, when we don't even cut off the river access until it hits 75. So, yeah, we're, and we don't have any trouble hitting 75 in the summer.
53.
Yeah.
13 is about 53.
Jenny, you had a question?
Yes, I just had a thought, and I don't know if it's anything that would be, I don't know how you could do it, but aeration, you put that into funds aeration you put into funds to help combat that. If there was some way that we could have an aeration device or something at the return of river flows, whether it be at a up the fields or whatever, just more rocks or something that kind of add that. It may be to cool it down a little bit. I don't know. Is that something you guys have looked at or thought about?
Yeah, you're actually the second person to bring that up in a meeting. Aeration would increase dissolved oxygen. I'm not sure it would. Yeah, just based on my experience in the White River, like going at all these sites 5-6 years in a row now, there's no problem with aeration. There's whitewater riffles throughout the entire region. So I think like to decrease temperatures, creating things like pools, side channel pools, and having riparian shading may be more effective. Yeah, it's, I don't know how you'd aerate an entire river either, but essentially rapids are natural aerators. And there's plenty of that in the White River because it's a pretty steep gradient.
Okay.
This is T. Wright.
Yeah.
This is T. Wright. Back to the question that Steve asked about the fish ponds in the Upper White. My question revolved around an understanding of any nutrient loading coming out of those ponds and how that affected this issue.
Okay, so
CPW has a study on that one, right, Natalie? So we could let them speak to that if they're there.
yeah, CPW specifically measured the nutrients in the ponds and above and below the ponds. I
don't think we have anybody from CPW here.
Okay.
So I guess the only thing, I mean, that study is yet to be finalized, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But the thing to think about, T-Right, is we don't have that situation on the South Fork, and we do on the North Fork, and yet the nutrient increase is the same on both of them. So we come back to that and think maybe it's not as much of an issue as we initially thought it might be.
Interesting.
Yeah, like
okay,
they
thank you.
Yeah, they might not be causing the long-term increase in nutrients, but you know, what we found is that areas with higher phosphorus and higher temperatures had greater algal biomass. So there could be, you know, a fish pond that's contributing nutrients, a wastewater treatment plant that's contributing nutrients, like eliminating those sources wherever they occur may be what needs to happen based on our results. So if the CPW report shows that there's a lot of nutrients coming out of those, that may be a source to target.
Right, and I think that that's
Okay, thank you.
come away with from the conservation, well, from the TAG, the technical advisory group and all, is really your decreased flows increases your concentration, right? So we all, in any way we can, if we can reduce nutrient inputs, we ought to be looking at that real hard. And so it doesn't matter whether it's from a forest fire, it's from California forest fires, to agriculture, to fish ponds, whatever it might be, we need to take a hard look at that. Because the pollution is dilution, right? Well, we got the other way.
And Callie's right. That's sort of the difference in the argument. One being what's causing the overall trend versus what might you do about it? So those are two slightly different questions. And our study helps a little bit with both, in that we don't have, a smoking gun in any one particular land use or area, because we do see this more regional signature, and it compares well with, or is similar in comparison to other rivers like the Yampa. And so the second piece on what do you do about it, that goes back to what Natalie was trying to say with, the increased temperatures, increased nutrients, especially phosphorus, those tend to correlate with those higher algae areas. So where you can decrease temperature or reduce nutrients, that might be a good step moving forward for locals to decide on.
Okay, any other questions online or in the room? Thank you very much for the presentation.
And I just might say thank you to the Basin Roundtable for the help and funding and support.
Thanks for the presentation. Moving on. Presentation of the final report on the Yampa Water Management Plan. That's it. Okay.
Yeah, before they figured it out, so we could take it.
All right. Nicole will be, Nicole, are you with us right now?
I'm here.
Oh, thank you. I'm gonna turn this over to Nicole in a second. We're gonna give her about 20 minutes to try to review the report, the final report. It was included in your packet. Ended up with about 25 pages or so. Want you to take a look at the summary that we're going to provide for you, answer any questions you have, and hopefully have an acceptance of the report as our final report. And then Steve and I are going to talk a little bit about how an idea that we have about how to continue the roundtable work on these integrated water management plans. Now that we've completed the plan, we've got a list of projects, how can the roundtable do to help support and accomplish this? So Nicole, take it away, please.
Thank you, Ken. Hey, Patrick, I have some slides that I would like to show. Can I? Yeah, thank you. Can you guys give me a thumbs up if you can see?
Yes, we can see that.
Awesome, great, thank you. Okay, so this is going to be the, hopefully, the last sort of standard presentation of the Yampa Integrated Water Management Plan Committee to the Basin Roundtable. The group met a couple of weeks ago for a final meeting of this committee and reviewed the final report. We have spent basically all summer, a small group of us spent all summer writing and editing and designing this report with the help of Blue Fire Collective, which is a steamboat-based graphic design and branding firm. So the full report is in your packet. It is very readable. It's only 25-ish pages. So I would encourage all of you to take a flip through it, but I'm just really quickly, I'm going to just walk through the major sections of the report, and I probably am not going to take 20 minutes to do this. I think it's going to be pretty quick. But this is basically the culmination of 4 years worth of work by about 25 people. It has been a long and difficult and enlightening process. I think we've all learned a lot. We've all built some really great relationships, and we have some really good ideas that a lot of people are excited about moving forward. So I put this quote up here on this slide: much like the pieces of a puzzle that come together to form a picture, every element of the river plays a role in its general health and viability. And where we really landed around telling the story of the integrated water management plan process was this idea of a puzzle and puzzle pieces coming together to sort of show the entire river. Each piece is separate on its own, but together they make up the entire river ecosystem and the water users. And we've also really focused on this idea of balance. How do we have a river that is in balance with
both its human users and its ecosystem. And so when we developed a lot of the recommendations, we really focused on this idea of a balanced river system. I did just want to really quickly, the website for the entire project is down at the bottom, that Google Sites. And if you go over there, any of the final deliverables for this project are all here. So the final report is there, all of the stakeholder surveys and interviews, all of the final reports from the different technical pieces that we did, as well as committee meeting minutes and all the action plans. So if you have an interest in digging deeper, it's all there for you to take a look at. One of the things that we did in this process was have a conversation and make some decisions about what a balanced Yampa River system means to this group of people. Kind of given all of the information that we collected from stakeholders and water shortages and the river ecology, what does a balanced Yampa River system look like both today and into the future? And so we came up with these different characteristics of what a balanced system looks like. I'm not going to go through and read these. You can take a look at them in the report. I think that we presented them to you at your last meeting as well. But they're in four major categories, which are education, understanding, and collaboration about the river, human use of the river corridor itself, and then the water in the river. So each of these has, 1, 2, or 3 sort of characteristics of how we're defining what a balanced system looks like, both today and going forward.
And let me just add to that, that this was a real, this became necessary because during the review of some of the technical reports, what was the baseline? Are we talking about the Yampa River of 200 years ago? We're not going to talk the railroad or CDOT into moving the highway or the railroad, and yet they've had a pretty dramatic effect on the river. So that's why we decided to explore what is a balanced Yampa River? What we all agree are the components that kind of give us a fundamental baseline. So this ended up being a really important part of the plan. Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. And so then the next section of the report, there's sections 2 and 3 are kind of what did the Integrated Water Management Plan Committee do and what did we learn? So there's just several pages that outline basically the methods of what we did in terms of stakeholder. How did we look at stakeholder perceptions? Who did we talk to? What did we find? The diversion infrastructure condition assessment done by JUB and Wilson Water Group. A look at water shortages, and then the river health indicators, which was the remote assessment and some follow-up technical work. So we just go through kind of all of the methods of each of those and then link to the different reports within it. And then there's a whole section on what we found. And we kind of present what we found overall, both through stakeholder perceptions, what we heard from stakeholders, as well as river condition. And then there's also one-ish page for each of the 4 river segments. So we break down some of those findings by river segment as well. And then we go right into the final recommendations. There are 20 recommendations that have come out of this process. These are the consensus-based recommendations that we've been developing since, I would say, about April of this year. This is basically all of the puzzle pieces coming together. Each of these recommendations, there's a document that goes, I think it's like 65 pages, and it goes into a lot more detail on what each of these recommendations are, who's going to lead it, what the next steps are, if there's an estimated cost, who the partners are. And so there's a pretty good implementation plan that's behind all of this. And again, it's available on the website if you want to dig into that a little bit more. So I am going to stop there with kind of the overview of the report. Again, it's pretty easy to review and read. I don't know that I need to go into a whole lot more detail on it. And Ken asked me to before we sort of open it back up to the roundtable for any questions, Ken asked me to draft maybe a recommended motion. I am certainly not wedded to this, but it was just something for you guys to consider and think about in terms of the action that we would like to see the roundtable take tonight. So I will stop there and turn it back over. Maybe Ken, if you can help facilitate the Q&A since you're in the room.
So did everybody get a chance to look through the report, the final report? And what questions or comments do you have that you'd like to share with the group?
Anybody online have any comments?
The committee was really pleased with the way the report turned out. We actually formed a subcommittee of about a half dozen people to, choose the general theme and then just sort of outline what the report would look like and then work on each of the different sections. And then we had a graphic design company work with us during that period of time. And they're the ones that did the final draft of this and added the artwork. So that's why it looks a little better than probably your average homework assignment you turned in college.
I have a question on the recommendations. Is there something specific that can be an action item that the roundtable could encourage?
That's a lead into our next step. Yeah.
Okay.
We would hope that all 20 would be ones that we could support, but probably to varying degrees. Some of them might be more important to you, some might be more important to Steve. But we think all of them are well vetted and well thought out. I mean, they had to fill out extensive amount of paperwork on exactly who the leads were, who all their partners, funding sources, what the goals and outcomes would be. So anything that made this list is not just an idea that somebody wrote down on a napkin. This is a, Nicole, do you want to detail it all of what all went into that spreadsheet?
Oh yeah, I can't. I don't have that document up. I'd have to kind of search for it. But essentially, for each one of these 20 recommendations, there is like who is the lead entity, what is the big idea, who are the partners that they need to work with, how much money is it going to cost, what is the next step, what are the funding opportunities or partners that they would like to go after in order to get started, and then sort of what is your first step. So for each of these, all of that is already outlined and agreed to, and people have raised their hand and said, I am going to do X. And so I feel really good about each of these having a pretty clear path forward. And I'm confident that within the next 6 months or so, the roundtable is going to see probably multiple grant applications to start getting some of these projects off the ground.
And I would be surprised if there's a third of these projects that are already well underway. There's active work being done today.
That's a great point, Ken. Thank you. Yeah, a lot of these, this was a 4-year process. So by the time you write it up and document it, people have in some ways, they've already moved forward and have begun to sort of build on and implement the ideas that they came up with, in some cases like 18 months ago. So Ken is right. Several of these already have a lot of momentum behind them, and people are actively, cultivating funding and partners to move some of them forward.
All right. Any other questions?
So can you put the motion back up, Nicole? Yeah, so Mr. Chair, I would move that the Yampa-White-Green Basin Roundtable accepts this final report, including its findings and recommendations and final work product of the Yampa Integrated Water Management Plan Committee. Longer.
Motion is made by Doug, second.
Hodge, second.
Hodge, I'm sorry. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So one of the things that we wanted to explore is just how we can continue this work, because while we may have finished the final plan and the scope of work in the original grant application, in many ways, we're just really beginning. A lot of these projects are going to take years to complete. Some of them are really quite technical. So we wanted to, and I've been kind of throwing out some ideas over the last 6 months to the committee, and no one has like really said, oh, we just got to do that. But then I talked with Steve, and Steve goes, no, I've got a slightly different version of that, and I'd like to present that. So we've got an idea that we wanted to present tonight about how we might move forward. Get some feedback from you. If you are willing to consider this as a possibility, we bring back more of a formal draft plan in November. And if the draft plan is agreed to, we probably come back again in January for some final action and probably with a grant application that will go with it. So I'm going to turn this over to Steve and let him explain his ideas about how we might move this forward in the future.
Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, so just keep in mind, we're not asking for approval, we're just kind of asking for a thumbs up or a thumbs down on this. Go ahead, next slide, Patrick. So the very last page of what you just accepted talks about IWP next steps. And I've been sitting at this roundtable for 7 or 8 years now, and I don't feel that we're getting to the work that needs to be done. We have a dip out there. We have the Yampa-Integrated Water Management Plan. We're going to have the White River in WRWI. I can't remember what it stands for. But we're going to have suggestions coming out of the White River, and I mean, at some point, T-Rite or some of the Green River folks may come up with something. So we have all these ideas for grants, but we don't seem to spend a lot of money. And one of the things that disappointed me is looking at that, and we didn't put that up tonight, but looking at the grants, you look at people that have applied for Basin Roundtables that have applied for $12 and $13 million worth of state funds, coupled with 5 or 6 million of their own funds. They've been able to get, parlay that into $30-40 million worth of work. We're the second lowest. We have just over $1 million of state funds that we asked for.
We beat North Park.
Yeah, we beat North Park by like $150,000. But we're kind of sitting on the end, and we have things that I think that we ought to really be trying to get done. We talked about a lot of things in the Basin Roundtable, but we really don't go out and try to bring projects in that meet our Basin implementation plan. So one of the things I talked to Ken about was that perhaps the next steps would be to continue to meet and to utilize a facilitation process to outline the purpose, membership, and task of a subcommittee or working group of the Yampa-White-Green Roundtable focused on supporting implementation of projects and recommendations from our Basin Implementation Plan, the Colorado Water Plan, because there are some educational things there that may not be fully represented in our PEP, the Yampa Integrated Water Management Plan, the White River Integrated Water Initiative, and any potential projects coming out of the Green River Basin. So a vision of this would be made up of, the committee would be made up of roundtable members and relevant community members, such as NRCS and others. And we would definitely have to hire some sort of water basin projects coordinator to help try to keep all this in line. I'll tell you, without Nicole's help and her running this project, I don't know how she got it
to 25 feet just over the last couple of months, but it was a major lift. So, go ahead, next slide, Patrick. So, the subcommittee, would work with recommendation leads, because we don't want to create the projects as a subcommittee. What we want to be able to do is assist in trying to manage, bring projects in, bring folks together, maybe look for alternate funding sources, those sorts of things. But try to start moving some of this forward. And so we want to work with the recommendation leads to help identify and address barriers to getting projects and recommendations implemented. We want to continue information sharing and collaborative design of projects and recommendations to ensure they create multiple benefits for an array of stakeholders. We want to identify and assist with collective funding needs and pursue joint fundraising efforts through local, state, and federal grants and private philanthropy sources. We want to build public support for the IWMP's findings of recommendations to aid in the implementation and the coordination of the Basin Roundtable's public education, participation, and outreach committee. So we want to be able to use PEPO to advertise what we're doing, essentially. So, so my idea, and that I've talked with Ken about, was we really don't want an IWMP committee. We really don't want a WRWI committee. We really don't want a PIP committee all out there trying to get projects done. My opinion, I think what we ought to have is a projects coordination committee that can try to pull some of these projects together, identify funding sources, and be able to kind of localize projects. And if you've got head gates and measuring devices over, you're not all the way around the county, you can kind of say, well, geez, I got 20 of them right here to do, and help out people like NRCS and others that do have the funds, and perhaps try to move some of this forward. So next slide, Patrick. But if you read the report that you guys just accepted, the recommendations, there's 2 on the river corridor, there's 4 or 6, excuse me, for the water in the river, there's 4 for even use of the river corridor and its water, and there's 8 for basin-wide education, understanding, and collaboration. So there's 20 total. Next slide. I stole this page from our BIP, and this is page 56, volume 1, table 7 is a snapshot summary of the Yampa-White-Green Basin projects. So right now we've got listed 84 different projects. 57 of them just got added in our 2020 rewrite. 4 projects from the original BIP got completed. 30 projects are in implementation. That doesn't mean that we're actually working on them, but there's planning going on. They may not have funding. They may be missing pieces and parts, but people are actively working on them. And then of those projects, 35 meet M&I needs, 43 meet ag needs, 52 meet environmental and recreation needs. And the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 are like tier 1 that's basically a project ready to go, meets our basin implementation plan. It's something that we really want to do. There's 29 of those sitting out there. There's 12 tier 2, which they're just a little bit behind. Maybe they're not as well organized. Tier 3 are stuff that people's talking about. And tier 4, which only has 5 projects, are things that have been kind of mentioned, but probably not right now. So they're kind of off the table. But just 65% of those 84 projects have some associated costs with them. And the cost for those projects all in is about $655 million. So there's a lot of projects out there. And, I've been chair of the grant committee for a few years, even before we didn't have the grant committee. We don't actively go and look and try to solicit grants that kind of meet our basin implementation goals. What happens is people bring in projects and we try to see how they would fit inside our basin implementation plan or inside the Colorado water plan and say, well, yeah, it kind of fits, maybe we can fund this. I'd like to see that change, actually. Go ahead, Patrick. So let me just run quickly through the time frame before we have the discussion. So we met as an IWMP group on September 6th, and we talked about ideas, and there were lots of good ones thrown out on how we should do it. So our plan, Ken and myself, was bring kind of a rough draft to this meeting and to get basically a thumbs up or thumbs down. If the idea has merit and passes the thumbs up vote by the BRT tonight, a fleshed out version of how the subcommittee working group might work and how projects would be identified, prioritized, and assisted by the group would be discussed at the November 8th meeting. And then a final review of the subcommittee working group would be presented at the January 11th, 2002 meeting, where at that time we either form the committee or not form the committee based upon what people think. So during this time frame, the IWMP committee would continue to function with funds remaining in the account until the subcommittee is formally created or is voted down. So Nicole's put some things in place. She won't be with the project, but there's a couple of people that are going to start carrying the message and advertising and whatever. And then Ken and I have to work on what kind of assistance that we'll need to just continue the project on to get us into January or March, wherever. So there are limited funds left over in the account for the IWMP, but not a lot. So go ahead, Patrick. So we've not given a lot of time for thoughts or discussion in tonight's meeting, although we may have a little bit more time. Nicole got through the report pretty quickly. We will address what we can during the meeting, but if time does not allow, please email your comments to Ken or myself. And basically, if we get the thumbs up, we'll start working on what that committee might look like and how it might function. So I think the last slide, Patrick, is just a thumbs up, we'll continue working, and a thumbs down, we'll go back to the drawing board, because we do need to figure out how to continue with the 20 recommendations on the Yampa IWMP. But I personally think there's a bigger need for pulling in the IWMP, the White River and dip stuff, and just try to bring forward and find some funding on a larger scale for some of these projects.
Steve?
Yes.
Steve, this is T. Wright.
Yes, sir.
I can be supportive of your proposal here, Steve, in no small measure, because I trust how much and know how much effort you put into this last one. My comments, though, and my word of caution is around how, and it's a broad comment about any and all of our subcommittees. Lessons learned out of this process, any committee that's doing work on behalf of the roundtable and spending money, we've got to set up a process with a great deal more chaperoning by the roundtable, and no monies that get spent in advance until we know we're all in agreement where that's hit. Because I have to say, I think in hindsight, we didn't have an appropriate use of our funds, that we had to go back and make some major corrections. And I'm not supportive of being repeated. I see a lot of thoughts here about how to do this right going forward, and I want to be supportive of that. But I want to make darn sure that any committee that moves forward does so only with the complete blessing of the roundtable, and not and respecting the appropriate use of our funding. Thank you.
Yeah, so definitely, I mean, we only have access to WSRF funds, right? Nothing would change there, whatever comes out of this, call it a project coordination committee, whatever whatever name we come up with. It would all have to go through our grants, our grant committee, and then onto the Basin Roundtable. We're no way are we funded. So number one, the Basin Roundtable can't get state WSRF funds. We're not allowed. So that's why we have to use contractors for everything. But no, that definitely we would keep that separate. We would still have that our entire grant process wouldn't change.
Jeff, did you?
I think Steve just answered. I was just gonna ask you to say more about the relationship between this committee entity and grants. But I think you answered it. It would just be, they would do groundwork, but grants would still do what grants does.
Yeah, I mean, they might. So the biggest need that I see, Jeff, is somebody in Northwest Colorado to coordinate and to bring folks together and to be able to find funding. And who better than the Basin Roundtable to do that? But I'm not, we have limited funds, typically $300,000 a year. So we're not going to be able to find funds, but there's a lot of water. There's a lot of water funds. There's a lot of money out there right now that we need. And so we need to bring in people from the organizations that have the money or can direct us to the right place to get the money. And I would hope we bring this projects coordination in, get all this done and not spend any of our money, find the money and from the river district or wherever it comes from. But just trying to get some of these projects moving and try to get, if Jeff's doing a head gate and whoever's doing a head gate, well, let's find the rest of the head gates that need to be done. Let's bring it in. So now NRCS says, oh, great. Now we can go in there, design everything, make some needed upgrades, and let's take care of this. And we talked, and Clinton was at our meeting on September 6th. And that was his comment, was he would just like some entity to try to bring folks together and kind of merge projects, if that's what needs to happen, or help find funding for projects.
Yeah, T-Right, absolutely no authority whatsoever, other than to encourage and recruit and organize and coordinate and bring some recommendations before the roundtable with their approval. No independent authority or ability to spend money in any way is trying to be implied.
Okay, Doug?
So just a couple of comments. So when we talked about this at our meeting, our IWFP, I guess, the question is, do White River folks, do we want to get, together and figure out how we can do this, or is that out of the realm as well? So, and then the second problem we have, we need a fiscal regime. Who's going to be holding the money? And who's going to be running that too? Because roundtable, as Steve said, we don't really have the ability, and it was discussed with the ability of the Upper Yampa to be able to do it, or maybe the Colorado River District doing it. But what requires staff and time and money for those entities too. You don't do that stuff with the staff that you got on hand right now. So somehow there's got to be a takeout of that as well. So, those are the questions that I asked Steve and Ken when we had this discussion. First off, can we come together as the two basins and have this vision, I think more visioning and more trying to get things actually on the ground. I'm thumbs up on that part of it. I guess I'm a little concerned about, continuing on the process, but at the same point in time, we got 20 recommendations out there. Do we just flush them down the toilet and say, that's fine, we're done, and we don't need to worry about it anymore? We go back to Steve's water plan, the first water plan that got put on the shelf and we didn't see. The other comment I have, so, maybe we could apply for some of these water planning grants that I didn't even know existed. So, really, where did DD money go? Went into that water planning grants, if they're still but I don't know if anybody knows how that was happening and what was happening with that. And I'm pretty privy to what's happening with water money. Anyhow, my comments, sorry.
Okay, one in the back of the room.
Like I tell with the Colorado River District, that our two directors here in our days have been mentioned a few times. And I'm on the roundtable from the River District. It's my first personal experience here. But yeah, and I asked Hunter Cosby before I came up here, hey, what's this integrated water management plan all about? Is this a bit, what is this, how's this tie in? We got a little bit of an overview, but I would say, I think looking at the two different basins, you have all the players here. If people aren't aware of the Community Funding Partnership Program, that's our larger 7A program, but we also launched an accelerator grant process the last couple of months. And we're just about to approve our first round tomorrow at the budget hearing. And people looked at me and said, hey, it'll be for the Yampa-White stuff. But you guys have gone for CFP grants for other things. So but that would be a process to help kickstart your next step, the accelerator grant, which is what you're asking to do. And then the River District staff is working really hard to look at all the different buckets out there that are go for that next step. I would urge you to reach out to maybe Lawyer or myself and point in the right direction. The next step, you got to conclude the order and the different fiscal agents. I think you break it down to your smaller basins, the conservation districts, or
Yeah, it's definitely not us to answer your question.
or individuals.
Yeah, I mean, if the recommendation leads or the project leads are going to come in, and we can help them, but ultimately they've got to find their own bookkeeping.
The accelerator grants also to help write.
Yes.
To help get people that don't have that need. So.
I think overall, more conversations need to be had about this because there may be a channel that this would work. And that way our constituents would actually be more well served with applying for monies that are available and ideas on how to conserve and promote water.
Okay. Chris Collins, I'm also with the White River. Just off the cuff here, I can run intrigued by that idea of two different groups maybe collaborating on grants and stuff like that. I know we're just at the top of my head, this is kind of a surprise. But for me it was. But I think when I look at the Yampa versus the White River water issue, I think it's two different. There are different rules that are coming out of it right now. And we're 2 years into this. You guys are 4 years into it, so we're still trying to figure out where we want to go. But we're moving pretty quickly on a couple of our projects, I think. But I like the idea and the tree by idea of a couple of groups or more groups, applying to a get more power, get bigger money if we go together. Yes. But my concern is, there's different goals and objectives. I don't want to be bogged. I wouldn't want anyone to be bogged down. Yeah, I know the answer to that. Yeah, and I guess, I mean, really, what really struck me right between the eyes was when they talked about the 560, NRCS's 566 plans and the money that they got up on those things, where they got $1 million or $8 million for projects up there, but what they did is they put together a group of people and they went out and figured out what all the projects are, and then applied for the funding because they were in 2 states and multiple basins and whatever. So some of the funding, I think, actually benefits the farther we can, the more aerial extent we can pull in, the greater the chance we might get some federal funding from the infrastructure or from the Colorado River District or wherever. So
This committee would be choosing winners and losers. It would be supporting any recommendations that your group had. And that's the idea. And maybe there is some synergy between the basins, maybe not. Maybe they really are unique, but we still would want to support them and help them come forward with around.
We got a couple of people online that have questions also.
Doug?
Hello. Are you aware of any other IWMPs around the state that are doing what you're proposing?
No, I don't know of any job for IWMPs.
I don't know either way.
Nicole?
Okay, well, I'm just
Nicole, are you
curious.
still on?
I am, I think the unique thing about this process is that it was through the roundtable. Most of the time it's through, an actual organization like a water conservancy district or a county or an NGO. And so the implementation already kind of lives with an entity, and our challenge, I think, in doing it through the roundtable is exactly that the implementation is now spread out amongst 7 or 8 different entities, and so I think that's why we're a little unique.
Okay, and then my second question would be, if this went through, would we need to amend the IWMP charter? Thank you.
Yeah, maybe, Doug. We don't know. We'll have to take a look at it if it goes through, but essentially what would happen is you'd almost come to the end of the IWMP process.
Yeah.
Potentially. Well, we'd have to see.
Jenny, did you have a question?
Yes, the reason I think this is interesting is I think that we all need to remember that we're all in this room and we're all mindful and that's our water. And any way that we can together as a group protect our water and keep it here and make it better and conserve it and make sure that it does not go down the river, so to speak, and that the lower basin does not decide to say, hey, the upper basin really hasn't done a whole lot. And if we can show that support, that we are totally committed to our water, I think that would be a good, I don't know how this is going to work out. I don't know that, but I think that the idea itself is very good and very, it sends a message to the other roundtables, and it sends a message definitely to that lower basin that we're serious.
Okay, Kelly?
So again, I think it is a totally new concept. I will need some time to think about it. I have some concerns. Probably the first thing that comes to my mind is the value and the importance of the locally led. And it just feels like we might be. I'm just thinking from our group that's working on this, the momentum is being driven from those landowners. It's not from me. And I'm worried, how do we make sure we keep that if we get too big and too broad? they're interested in what's working, what's important to them. Yes, it's on the conservation district to find the funding, but we are moving forward in finding those partners and partnerships and applying them to the river district for the money that we will be looking at some PL 566 and so forth. But that is driven 100% by our local landowners saying, this is what we want, this is what we need. So I would need some.
Kelly, we need, to move this conversation forward, we need White River representation between now and November to hear your thoughts, and make sure that this represents your needs as well. That was the whole idea. That was really
That's good, because I don't
point.
have any detail.
Yeah, I mean, this is just, you know, are you guys interested in that? In having this continue the process of trying to figure out and come to you in November and say, after thinking, maybe we can't do it, but if we can't do it, here's how it might work.
You first. You.
Will.
Will. Sorry.
You.
There's a second rule. So I kind of hear your concern, guys, and I was kind of thinking this too, because being on the lower Yampa, it seems like there's always a lot of resources in the upper Yampa. And I've said it before, I said, when this IWMP is all over, you know, what's going to happen in the lower Yampa, I mean, our projects are going to probably fall away a little bit because, you know, we don't have much representation when it comes to like kind of brainstorming and figuring out how we can keep moving forward. And I was kind of concerned about that. And so I think you guys could have some similar concerns. I know I don't have to be locally driven, but at the same time, we don't want all the money to kind of get lopsided to where there's more resources for finding these funds and everything. So I think the idea in my mind is kind of coming to this concept with representation, whether it's from the Green, the White River, or the lower and upper Yampa, is just kind of having a voice in this committee of representation. So no one group kind of falls away when the project's not getting that because their voice of anybody except for that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I think, Will, to your point, it seems like, to me at least, and it's brand new to me too, but the idea of the project coordination, stimulation, and fermentation, and any other shuns that you can throw in there, Steve, is really kind of divorced from IWMP, isn't it? I mean, the IWMP produced a certain set of things that some people think we ought to get done.
Yeah,
There's a lot of other things.
And there's already project leads
We
that
are
we're working on.
And so I'm kind of hearing a lot of people say, gosh, we work on policy quite a bit, but we don't put the shovel in the river very much. And I don't think that has too much to do with the IWMP. That's not the same as saying that Will's concerns aren't valid, because I can understand.
Okay, any more discussion?
Just the thought that I'm still a little fuzzy on what you guys are proposing to do, what role you're proposing to play. Knowing, for example, the 20 recommendations, all comments out there, here we said maybe there's things out there outside of WP that are logical pick up. Maybe the same goes for picking up things outside of the White River initiative, if I got that right. So, just if you guys could flesh that out a little bit, because parts of it, because right, it's general enough. I think we probably all have a slightly different interpretation of what this could or couldn't be. And you don't even you don't need the answer now. It's have some figured out, Steve. But yeah, I love the idea of not letting this stuff drop. And if people have energy to continue on, then more power to them. I'm a little process, so if you know, PL 566, nationwide coordination is overwhelming to me. But so I'm just, if you guys come up with a flush idea of what it is, what role it would play, how do you want redundancy, how to create value without redundancy, how maybe pick off bite-sized pieces like overwhelming processes. I think that'll work. That's just what I'm saying.
How about we go with this? You guys try to refine your proposal or your idea, solicit comments from the group and talk about it at the next meeting and see if it gets more traction.
Provisional thumbs up.
Conceptually, it seems to be okay.
Okay, so in the presentation that Patrick had up is Ken and Mike, But so if you have some ideas, or you have some questions, or you have some concerns.
Or you want to work with us as we refine this?
Communicate, folks. Okay. Good enough?
Good enough.
Let's move on.
Thank you.
We're going down to reports of applicable standings and special committees. Big River Committee, Jeff and Tom.
Go ahead, sir.
Go ahead.
Not right.
Well, I think Tom's going to take up a little bit on the IBCC, so let me just give you the 30-second overview of Big River. We're really trying to tackle right now the looming crisis and the interim guidelines, and we've had a good discussion today about how those two things might be related and how we can support the activities of both the upper basin and the river district. And that probably includes a couple of letters of support for documents that have been recently written by those two groups sent to the Bureau, and maybe expanding that idea a little bit to include ways that we can move some of those policy and implementation ideas for the way we operate the system up to start helping us as soon as next year. If you've been watching it all, you know that the situation is pretty bleak. There are projections. The original extreme drought projection said that we would need between 600,000 and 4.2 million additional acre feet as soon as next year. Right now, the figure that's settling in looks about 2.7 million acre feet. And so that's a lot of water that's going to have to come at a flood. So there's work to be done, and those are the things that the Big River Committee is kind of focused in on. Probably need to have a meeting in about 4 more weeks, so we'll have a better, more formal review for you, and probably a couple letters of support to improve by the November meeting. And on the IBCC front,
IBCC hasn't met too much lately. It did have I guess you'd call a meeting in July. I wasn't able to make the report. And then we just got a letter from Dan Gibb, the director of IBCC, saying that he wants to use the IBCC as project proponents, like to bring forward projects with Big River Basin. So in light of what the discussion we just had was help with projects, big bigger projects fall within the state water plan and the DRP. Then the IBCC will be tasked with that. That's very latest. I think, about 3 days ago.
Okay, anything else or questions? If none, moving on. WRIWI, Kelly.
That is a funny acronym. How about we just call it the initiative?
Okay.
So we are kind of winding down phase 2, which was, of course, and you've heard me say it before, the mission and the goals. And we now have identified the 4 primary projects that we want to proceed with. 2 bigger ones, 2 not quite as big. You'll be seeing a grant application from us. Looking at what this grant that will be coming forward here will be focused on a water supply project, which is basically looking deeper into and developing a model for the return flows of the irrigation. They're within about a 10 mile. The middle reach, what we've identified as the middle reach of the river. So that basically takes into account above where the big ditches start taking out, and you have all those nice green irrigated fields down to the bottom where they are, and try to account for and develop a model that will really work there, that will help us understand how we can, if we should go to flood or away from flood irrigation, or is there really the value that we all think there is in flood irrigation for return flows that gives a range of water. So really trying to nail that down and understand where that water's going and how it's flowing. Working with Dr. Ryan Bailey out of CSU, who has helped us develop a draft scope of work. There's lots of details to be flushed out, but moving forward with that, keeping our watershed coordinator or our coordinator position going, to keep our planning advisory committee going. And then of course we had really good success with the riparian assessments and the diversion structure assessments. We've got landowners asking for more of those. We had 2 that we've helped fund right now. We've got another one that'll be in the works and will be going. We've got a little bit of funding for him for the River District for a little bit more money for that one this fall. So those are projects that have come out of that assessment process, and we've got people that are really interested in some more of those. So we want to do those. So that'll be the grant application that you see primarily at the next meeting. The other piece that we are really focusing in on, and the reason that we called ourselves an initiative, you guys, there was a reason, and that is because it's not, I don't, it's really not an integrated water management plan. Because, when we talked about where we were going to end up, we didn't know. And so the initiative came into play because we were pretty confident that this group was going to think that the uplands were extremely important to our river health. So our upland vegetation management is the second big project. So primarily this, and we won't be coming to a grant to you with a grant for it right now, but we might be coming for a letter of support. We went to the U.S. Forest Service, the State Forest Service, and the National Forest Foundation to say, what do we need to actually start implementing some forest management projects upriver? And they said, we'd all love to help you, but we don't have no staff. So we said, all right, but what do you need? Staff. So, okay, let's start pooling our money. So we've got a $25,000 commitment from U.S. Forest Service. We'll be looking at State Forest Service for grants, as well as having conversations with them about helping fund that position. But our goal is to fund a position that will help maneuver all of the planning processes, the NEPA processes that have to be done on the federal land, but at the same time help the private landowners up there and work across those boundaries. Because we've got some country up there where there's some homes and so forth that are just sitting ducks for a fire. And that's where we will start, and then we want to build into much bigger projects and look at the White River Forest in the White River drainage, not over in the Aspen. So those are the 2 big ones. The water supply, forestry are the 2 big ones. The riparian diversion structure assessments is a third. And the fourth and final one is what do we call it? The water measurement device demonstration project. So we're looking at putting together, if any of you have been to the Crossroads or Cross Orchards demonstration project in Grand Junction, that have a few different measuring devices that you can turn the water on and see how it measures. We want to do that with about 10 or 11 different ones, so that would be available for our landowners to take a hard look at and say which ones do we need, or which would work better for me, as well as to help inform and educate high school kids, college kids, and so forth. We've got the CNCC is very involved. They are starting some water classes in the near future, and they would want to use this project big time for their classes and so forth. And it sounds like some FFA folks are very interested in it as well. So those are the 4 projects that are coming out of our phase 2. We'll wrap that up. It actually does go a little longer, which is a really good thing, because if we see new funding, if we see funding, we see WCD out of the WSRF grant until this time next year, basically. Looks like a long haul out through there. So, July. So, we're pretty happy with where it's going. We've also, I will say that out of that process and the focus that's come to the White River on that process has brought forward we are also applying for the thinking quick start, the accelerator grant. And then working with CAWA with that and other groups. We've got 3 big ditches that have some real severe challenges. They will be big money to address those issues. So we're looking at that. All that. We did today.
No, it's gonna go approve tomorrow.
Okay, that's what it
Staff
is.
recommendation.
Okay.
You talk nice to Tom and I.
Okay.
It's my recommendation
Yeah.
to the PL 566 program, up to I believe it's up to 25.
And I will say, these projects we're looking at, we'll be looking at long bit, a long word. Yes, perhaps.
Good information. Thank you. Any questions for Callie?
Just one, well, first, nice work, you guys just doing all the great stuff, and so compliments. The grant that you're coming forward with, which of the projects is that next month, which?
Yeah, it'll be primarily the water supply, so the return flow. That will be the biggest portion. And again, we'll be working with the River District to have conversations with them today about being matched on that.
So, Brian's done a lot of work on the return flow thing too. This is frustrating to me, how we can't figure this out. It's kind of like the algae thing, there's a lot of similarities between things. There's not all, there's a lot of differences, but there's a lot of similarities in the return flow based on elevation and soil type and all those things that are included. And then, we get CSU involved in it, you get the 25% add-on fee.
No, we're not doing that. We're finding a way around that because I refuse to do that.
Good for you. But anyhow, it's pretty frustrating, and then we don't want to have it so technical and specific, the specificity and so specific. We should be able to get something statewide that approaches some of these same areas that have similar types, whether it's in the Colorado Basin, or whether it's in the White River Basin, or whether it's in the Yampa Basin, based on elevation and ground type and how we turn flow. I can't figure out how hard this is. And Brian, you've been working on it a lot, and there's a whole lot of difference between, just like what Will said, there's a whole lot of difference between our whole Yampa. The difference between the higher, just like the same thing as in the white, the higher it is, the more probably the return flow retiming of the water. And then when you get it, we don't want it down here when we get down to Craig and the rest, because we're into salinity problems and we get into the Comanche Shale. So I don't know, I wish we could figure out a better way that we could do this, that kind of thing collectively.
And I totally understand that. I need to pick Brian's brain a whole lot more, but I will tell you, just in the 3 weeks we've been really talking and delved into this, it's going to be a challenge to get it all accounted for just right there in that little area. I can't imagine trying to do it bigger because you got all of your tributaries coming in, you know, and we're gonna have to account for those. The ditches and the diversions, but those tributaries, and there's just a whole bunch of little challenges.
But then we get you guys' report that came out, I mean, that we had the presentation on. It's still so vague. I don't know. I didn't know if I got anything. I mean, it's a great report. Basically, we're sitting here talking, it basically comes back to we have 22 years of drought. We got less snow, less water, and climate change, and it's getting hotter. So we have more algae.
Well, I'll visit with you about that because I will agree, but I will tell you it's one thing. We had a community that was being torn apart because everybody's.
Oh, I know, because everybody
pointing
pointed fingers.
And
So just come up with something.
You know, we have the data now.
Yeah.
Everybody had an opinion, now we have the data. And
Yeah.
that's what I think we need here is the data that protects our flood irrigation. We think, now we may learn that that's not true, but we think that flood irrigation is extremely important to rain. Everybody thinks that. So let's verify it so we can protect our interests when somebody says, I don't think you need to be flooded.
No, I totally
It's
agree.
not just range that
Yeah.
we're looking at benefiting. I mean, we're flood irrigation practices and how we operate in that middle range for so intensive taxes. That benefits for the immediate and rangeley looking further. That's what we believe we'll find out with this study.
I think there's one approach that we've been investigating, because I went down the rabbit hole of models with the sensitivity analysis, look at this model, tell us what orientation of it. I put it aside for a minute. I think there are some real techniques right now that we use. It's the means. What is the contribution of groundwater, i.e. live return flows to the point? At least that's where I'd like to do a little more investigation.
Okay, sorry. We're moving on. We went past.
So much for the 5 minutes.
Is Jackie Brown on line?
She's not, she's sick, she couldn't make it.
That's what I thought, but I still had her on the agenda. Is Aaron Light on?
Yes, I am here. I don't have a lot to discuss tonight. I did just want to announce that I do have been successful in filling some of my positions, which is great. So for those who are in this area, we have Mendy Figueroa, who's in the upper part of the Yampa River Basin, the headwaters, who started on July 25th. We have Erin Roden in the Little Snake and Green River Basins. So she's out of our Craig office. And then I've hired Debbie Raley as the Deputy Water Commissioner in the White River Basin. And we have, starting here next week, we have Betty Kraft, who is going to be the lead water commissioner for the White River Basin. So it's great. Right now, I'm only sitting with one vacant position, which is considerably a lot more people than I had 2 months ago. So I'm very excited about that. Then the other announcement is just to remind people we're in the middle of September. The end of the irrigation season is October 31st. Please, please, please provide records to us by November 15th. Tell your neighbors, tell your friends. We'll send out email reminders, but make sure you do supply your user supply diversion records. Other than that, that's all I have to say. I don't know if anybody wanted me to discuss anything in particular, but I'm happy to fill in on anything you wanted to know about or if you had questions.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Any questions for Aaron?
Aaron, does the Bureau of Reclamation have any standing in Colorado state water law and the ability to curtail or change water delivery obligations?
No.
That's good news.
That is good news.
I'll leave it at that, no.
Any other questions for Aaron? Okay, thank you, Aaron.
You bet.
Peppo report, Ken or Patrick?
I got a couple things. So we're going to have a very integral part of our PEPO committee is, and PEPO work we do in Northwest Colorado is the Yampa-White-Green. They're at the very end of their grant funding that they received from WSRF funds. And they are going to have a new application for us to consider. We will hear about it. Steve, what day is that? It's going to be here in November, or is it?
So they've actually already loaded the grant portal, but we take submissions for grants until September 21st. We have a grant meeting scheduled for, I believe it's October 12th. And anything that we give the kind of the nod to send on to the basic roundtable. Hopefully,
We'll have that. We'll have another $99,000 grant application. 2 years of assistance that does expand their capacity. We want to have an agenda item. Probably we decided today that we wanted to wait in January to kind of give everyone here an update of all the work that's going on with the committee. We have a Water 22 tour tomorrow. Patrick, you have been working more closely with this country and give a quick rundown.
Yeah, so part of Water Education Colorado, WECO, their Water 22 initiative is to have mini tours in each of the 8 basins. Our basin mini tour is tomorrow. We've got 6 participants. These participants are usually people that usually don't go on water tours, so it's not talking to the choir, it's trying to educate people that would need to know, maybe an economic development council, a commissioner that needs to know what's going on, etc. So we've had those invites out. We're meeting at the Carpenter Ranch. We're talking about the riparian there. Matthew that runs the Carpenter Ranch, and we're gonna have Kyle Munger talk about flood irrigation tomorrow at the Walker Ditch. We'll be coming down to Craig and talking with Melanie, talking about their proposed water park and the importance of that for the city of Craig. And then going to Elkhead, then we're having the Whitewater Initiative coordinator. I'm drawing a blank. Liz. We'll be doing a bus talk on that, talking about the White River Basin and what's going on down there from up the ranch to Craig. And then we'll go up to Elkhead Reservoir and I can use some help, but I get to talk about the lack of storage in Yampa and the importance of Elkhead for the fish recovery program. And we're going back to Carpenter Ranch with Yampa-Tika doing a microinvertebrate study collection. So that is our water tour.
Plenty of space for anybody else that wants to go. And then, of course, Holly already mentioned the water festival for the 5th graders. 400 students that will be there. And some help. If we want the owners to show up, I know I could use some help with my station. So if you're available next Wednesday, the Hayden Fair. Sure, thanks.
If I take a few minutes here, if you don't mind, I'd like to just review the website. I know a lot of people were asking, especially since we did not have a recorder today, where is the meeting material? So I just want to show that to you real quick, just to refresh everybody's memory about how you can get into this, prepare for the meetings beforehand. If you want to prepare or know where any information is. From the homepage, Yampa-White-Green.com, you scroll down, you'll see all our announcements there. We're still looking for recorder. I know that's on the agenda next, but if you want to point people to what they need to, that's what you can point people to on the webpage about the recorder. And then other interesting information about the Water Navigator map. I try to keep that updated. Some keep scrolling down our basic information past that. You can find now is where we have all the meetings scheduled that we are doing. So these are the meetings that are scheduled here. So if you click on, like Big River was before us, so that's why it was first couple, and then the roundtable, we all had a meeting today. But if you click on that particular meeting packet, it should take you to the Google Drive for the Big River. This was the Big River Committee. And then you click on a particular month. You should be able to get to the meeting information. So there's the agenda, and we'll have notes posted there. Once that's where all the notes for the meeting should be posted back in that particular website. And so you can always get back to the committees that way. So if you come back to click on our tab for the ERT meeting tonight, and click on the meeting packet, this is where you can, this will directly to the next meeting. So this one will take you directly to the September meetings. Next month it will take you directly to November meetings, and you can find all the information in the meeting packets and all the other presentations that we had here. Once we can share that information, we can, like, all the presentations should be shareable when we get it. If you come down here, the resources page, and you can find the past meeting minutes, packets, and agendas right here on the resource pages. If you want to look anything back of what's happened, that's where that is located on the resource.
As well as the YouTube videos.
And the YouTube videos I haven't put on the resource page, but if you look up right here at our YouTube channel, it should take you to the YouTube channel, and you can watch all the recordings of what you said or didn't say. So yeah, there's I'm missing one meeting here. I got to break the November meeting because the couple meeting and the roundtable meeting separated, but I have to find some video editing software.
Good job.
Also, on the bottom of this page, I'm trying to add now more peers coming events that you guys might be interested in there. So if there's any event that you think other people would like to be know about in the basin, please send it to me, and I can forward it on. Right now, I've got the Caro seminar, which is tomorrow, the Yampa Rendezvous with the Sustainability Council and Friends of the Yampa is doing, and the Watershed Assembly is coming up. So that's where you can find some information.
Good job, Patrick.
There's a lot of work that Patrick puts into this. This is not covered through the PEPAL funds. This is an additional WSRF fund grant fund that community agri-rights has. It helps pay for a lot of the work and support that. It's the roundtable and the PEPAL. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, community agri-rights.
Okay, under announcements, we are still looking for a recorder, and we can bump their pay.
Is that 6,500 that Jeff was talking about? Is that where the CWCB project? Because originally it was through CAA.
No, the recorder's always been a separate contract with CWCB.
Oh, it has been.
Yes.
Okay, even though it was April.
Even though it was April.
Oh,
We help fund, so April was when she was setting up the website, that was part of the WSRF grant through CAA.
Okay.
So that's, right, that's where it was with that, but no. She always had her 5,000 from CWCB to be the report.
Okay. And the recorder submits through those directly to. Who runs that, you know? Viola.
The Viola.
Okay.
I can jump in here. It's actually Vivian Pinelli who they send their invoices to, but you're right, they're just a separate CWCB contractor.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Very good.
Yep.
Next roundtable meeting is November 9th, and it looks like it's 6 o'clock. Elections are in November. Well, there is Kent Burgess, Chris, Frank LaFone, Rich Thompson, Jeff Myers, Jackie Brown, Jeff Comstock, and Doug Davis.
Are there any known vacancies or is everybody free? We're all free.
Just trying to give a heads up so everybody can get their decision made and let people know.
So you'll advertise those vacancies.
Advertising papers on the website. Facebook. Huh? I get done.
No pressure, Mr. Question.
Sometime in October.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Meeting's adjourned.
Good job, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.